years ago, I was asked to introduce the film Downfall, about the last week or so of Adolf Hitler's life in the bunker in 1945 Berlin. And I found it a little bit difficult to compose an introduction to the Student History Society at Royal Holloway screening. So I'm much going to repeat this now. It's something that we don't often say, but I hate Adolf Hitler. I hate Adolf Hitler for corrupting the morals and the sensibilities of one of the most sophisticated and educated nations in the world, and leading to bloodshed and destruction of life for needless aims. Now, that's an opinion you probably won't hear very often given by a historian, but let's put this in perspective. We're talking about someone who directly or indirectly led to the death of millions of people. There is still a certain fascination, a morbid fascination about the man, his rise to power, his influence over the German people, and how he was able to take a country that was dissatisfied with its 1920s post-war experience and convert it into a new military might, and one that put forward a new German empire in Europe from the mid to late 1930s. Now, the book by Colin Jacobson, or at least edited by Colin Jacobson, Underexposed, puts forward a number of images that were not commonly available at the time. In terms of Hitler's political career, he was someone who was charismatic, was compelling, someone who managed to carry an entire nation through the 1930s and into the 1940s when we look at Germany. And the point that Underexposed makes is that with respect to some of the images that he himself put together, his own photographer, his own personal photographer, Heinrich Hoffmann, was employed to photograph Hitler as Hitler would actually pose and rehearse in front of a mirror or have photographs taken of himself to see in which ways his body language could have the maximum effect in carrying forward his message. Now, we think about media training in the 21st century as being a common thing. Now we're looking back to the third decade of the 20th century, and here's someone who was determined to make an impact and realized the power of the image, whether it be through photography or through the way that he held himself when giving speeches to try and carry an audience over. Now, these photographs are described in Underexposed as being absurd or absurd looking, and questions Hitler's credibility or potential credibility had these photographs been available at the time. Now, the second of the pages which cover this has a very striking image which, when I showed it to my students, they started laughing. At least one person has described it as looking like a hammy theatrical presentation from a Shakespeare. My initial reaction looking at that was to cast my mind back to John Travolta in Saturday Night Fever and the classic pose that he struck on the cover of the posters, etc. Now, in our own minds, we are linking back to images of entertainment and perhaps absurdity. Would this have had such an effect at the time? Very probably, but we're looking back through a period of time now when we know what was perpetrated in his name and are considering how we would interpret these images, knowing how powerfully he projected those that he released to the public at the time. Now, I mentioned that the book Underexposed suggested that these images were absurd, and let me just read out briefly the passage at the end here. Such absurd images, had they been widely seen at such an early stage of Hitler's political career, may well have pricked the balloon of his shaky credibility. Now, I think that's a reasonable comment, Yet I'd just like you to think about one of the images, the one at the top corner here, where Hitler is raising his fists, and then like you to consider the cover of Time magazine from December the 21st, 1931. Although it is a drawing, it is a virtual identical drawing, including going down to the lapel button that Hitler had. Now, 6 years difference, and before he'd actually obtained political dominance in Germany, a similar image was made public. This is in an American magazine that won with a great degree of prestige. To be the cover of Times for some people is an ambition. So we just need to take a step back and just think in the context of what was happening in the 1920s and the 1930s, how unacceptable or absurd these images actually were. So in considering what we have with Time, and a resource that's going to be available to you online, Adolf Hitler appeared on the cover of Time a number of times during the 1930s. 1931, as I pointed out, 1933, again, militaristic in the uniform, the swastika scene quite prominent, but a picture, a painting, rather than a photograph. And in this instance, it looks like something akin to a deck chair with a dog by the side, making various reasonable assumptions about this being a, quotes, family man, even though he's now the leader of Germany. 1936, we have another image, again, a photograph, something that appears to be a little more posed, a little bit more austere. Hitler's reputation was being established, but nevertheless, someone important enough to be on the cover of Time. And in fact, the reputation of Hitler and Time magazine is something that we find by January the 2nd, 1939, Hitler had actually been named by Time magazine as their Man of the Year. The cover is less obviously of Hitler, but you can go online and read the eulogization about Hitler's contribution to, in this case, world peace. It would appear that Munich, something that's talked about in Britain with infamy, was something that was appreciated by Time magazine in the late 1930s. So just taking a step back from a historical consideration of photographs that were suppressed at the time, it would appear that that Hitler got enough coverage in the Western press in different means that his credibility was fairly well established before he started to take on what became the Allies earnestly from 1939.